A little bit back, we talked about Batman Arkham Knight and how this was a game that I said was a great superhero game to play around the Halloween season, actually taking place on Halloween, right? Well, here's the thing, there's actually another superhero game that I think is often forgotten that's a lot smaller that takes place in the spooky season, I should say, and that is Infamous Festival of Blood. Now, this is a standalone DLC game. Think something like Red Dead Redemption's Undead Nightmare, a game that you don't need the original game to play, but it is a spin-off game using a lot of assets, using the map, different things like that from the primary game that it's based off of, which in this case would be Infamous 2. It follows Cole MacGrath turning into a vampire and hunting down Bloody Mary, the leader of the vampires in New Marais. Now, I don't think a lot of people have heard of this game, and some that have just kind of completely ignored it because it's not really a canon game in the universe. In fact, it is a story told from the point of view of Zeke, one of Cole's friends. It is one of the darker superhero experiences that you can play in a game because it is sort of this de-evolution where Cole regresses into almost a primal state, becoming a vampire, having to fight against them and hunt them down throughout the city. It's really cool and something I want to take a few minutes to look at today. So if you enjoy this video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do appreciate that very, very much. I do have a question of the day for you, which is, do you like the Infamous series? And also, if you do, would you want to see it come back and in what way? Now, this game is very clearly based off of Infamous 2. It's using a lot of the same gameplay assets and pretty much everything, but I will say that it does have that sort of spooky season overhaul. It's very dark, a little more gothic. It's taking place during a festival, and also, of course, it is playing into the vampire mythology. For example, Cole gets rid of his amp at the beginning of this. It's pretty much taken from him, knocked out of his hands, and he actually is able to get a stake, which he uses to stake vampires and take them out. And you fight against various types of vampires. So there's normal, newly converted vampires, there are vampires that have been vampires for a while, and then there are the firstborn that actually look a lot like Man-Bat in many ways. They are essentially vampires that are ancient, like, well, much more ancient than the current ones that you're fighting. More along the lines of Bloody Mary herself, who is the main villain of this story. And this whole story kind of involves Cole going around learning more about the vampires in the city, trying to fight back against their scourge and their plague while using their powers against them, because it starts with him being bitten and slowly turning into this thing. And if he's not able to actually stop them before the next day dawns, he actually is going to lose his sentience in a lot of ways. He's going to be taken over by the same plague that has affected the rest of these vampires because Bloody Mary is going to have control over him. Think of her as like an alpha vampire, the central one, the one that's able to control and influence the actions of all the others. And something I like about this too is that because it isn't in canon necessarily, it is able to do a lot of the things that something like Undead Nightmare did for Red Dead Redemption, where it's able to go off the beaten path, go crazy with these stories and these characters in a what-if type scenario, also similar to things like the DC multiverse or Marvel's what-if comic books, where it'll take a just bizarre premise, literally what if the main character from the Infamous 1 and 2 games became a vampire, not something a lot of people would think of, and make an entire game focused around it. I think one of the coolest aspects of this little DLC is that it essentially not only doesn't need the original to operate, so you are able to buy it and play it if you just wanted a little standalone story, but also it does incorporate some of the best parts of the gameplay of Infamous 2, while also introducing new gameplay elements and moves. So not only are you doing things like staking vampires, which is different, but it is similar to the way Cole takes down normal enemies, just much more lethal, obviously, but also you're able to use vampire powers themselves. These include things like flying through the air at high speeds, drinking blood. It's not all positives. Like, for example, I do think that this story is very clearly just doing the story they want, where it doesn't actually allow for a lot of moral choices, which is something that almost all of the Infamous games do allow for. So that's kind of one thing where I'd say maybe it's a little bit of a negative, but overall, most of the things in this game are positives. I also think it's really cool to actually be able to see the city in a different light, to be able to see it in a different way than you see it during the core experience of Infamous 2, because it is remodeled. It is more gothic. You're going down to areas that you might not have accessed in the original, and also a lot of them do have almost a Halloween overhaul. There's even a couple of quests centered around a massive graveyard in the middle of the city. And these are things that I think are very interesting where, you know, it takes that original premise and it does turn it on its head. It actually reminds me in some ways too, I know I've said Undead Nightmare a few times, but it also reminds me in some ways of Spider-Man Miles Morales. You're gonna say, well, how would it remind you of that? Well, the fact that they're able to take that map and change it, but it's still the same city. You know, it reminds me a lot of Miles Morales, where in Spider-Man 2, in Marvel's Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac, they tried to go a little more different, you know, adding in a bunch of new areas, expanding it. They didn't just want to use the same map for the third time. But an element that was actually really cool in Miles Morales was the fact that Insomniac took that same map and they winterified it. That's not a word. You know what I mean? They gave it a facelift. They gave it a new splash of paint that kind of operated around that idea of it being around Christmas time. That's kind of what I get out of this game, is it's essentially like Infamous 2, if everything went wrong. It was about vampires, drinking blood, and fighting back against supernatural forces. And it's only able to do that because it's this story being told by Zeke. It's only able to do all of these crazy things with this character that I think a lot of people thought was gone for good. And so in that way, it's also kind of a fun, hidden story about a character that people thought was gone for good. And it's able to do that in a way where it's like totally outlandish. Now, one of the things that I think is really cool about this game too is that, yes, even though I did say a lot of people ignored it, you know, not being canon, and a lot of people weren't as interested in that sort of horror take on the superhero game of Infamous 2, there were a lot of people that were. Actually, and I didn't know this, but looking at the wiki page for this, as of November 19th, 2011, the game was the #1 downloaded game on PSN and was the #2 downloaded game of November 2011. So it was extremely popular at the time. Also something that I think is weird to look at because this series has been abandoned, and I guess add it to the pile of PlayStation exclusives that got abandoned, but it's weird to see how popular it was and just how popular this series was at the time that it eventually went on to just get dumped. Overall, I think the nicest part of this little experience is just the fact that it gives people a way to say goodbye to Cole. Cole is a character that I would love to talk about in the future. I know that when you resurrect or bring back or rehash every character, it can lead to a lot of problems. You know, it can lead to a lot of issues where you don't have a story to tell. But when it comes to Cole MacGrath, I really do think that he was kind of the heart of the Infamous series. You can absolutely tell stories without him. I liked characters like Delsin, you know, I liked some of the other characters that you get to play as, but they never really captured the magic that Cole and his first 2 games held for a lot of people. So it was nice to see sort of this send-off, ridiculous story saying goodbye to Cole and kind of expanding his lore and expanding his legend. You know, the demon of Empire City, seeing him interact with all of these supernatural elements, seeing him in this outlandish version of the world that is still based on the core experience of Infamous 2. And I think it's something that I wish more games would do. I do wish that, even though I love canon stories in games, I do wish that there were more times when people were willing to take risks and go absolutely bananas with their world, and Infamous Festival of Blood does just that. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I do appreciate it very much. I love Infamous. I'd love to talk about it more. I don't know if people still care about it or not, so you can let me know if you do. We do have other channels like Degenerate Plays where we play through games, Magical Jill where we cover a lot of anime stuff, JayRPG I've been working very hard on where I cover role-playing games. I put up a Halloween video for that channel. Unfortunately, that one is much smaller than this one, but if you check it out, I appreciate it. And of course, as well, we do have our store, cosmobunny.shop, which you can use to support this channel if you're interested. We make coasters, keychains, trays, and more out of recycled, repurposed comic book paper, manga paper, magazine paper, all of this stuff from books that are unable to be sold, that are damaged, that we get from local businesses and other places like that. We give some new life to them, transform some of that art into something new, and then we recycle the rest and keep it out of landfills. So we appreciate you very much. Hope you had a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.